When people think of the Evil Dead, they usually remember the images, the possessed eyes, the frantic camera racing through the woods, the blood, the chainsaw, Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi, the Necronomicon. But close your eyes for a moment. What do you hear? Perhaps it's those uneasy strings that seem to hover somewhere between dread and melancholy. Perhaps it's the sharp bursts of orchestral violence that accompany the Deadites' arrival. Or maybe it's something less tangible altogether, a feeling that the music itself is slowly tightening around the audience, refusing to let go. That's the work of Joseph LoDuca, a composer whose contribution to The Evil Dead is often overshadowed by the film's spectacular visuals, yet whose music helped give the franchise its unmistakable identity. Today on Sounds of Horror, we're exploring how one young composer, working alongside a group of equally ambitious friends, created one of horror cinema's most distinctive musical voices. One of the things that makes The Evil Dead such a remarkable story is that it wasn't created by an established Hollywood studio. It was built by friends: Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, Robert Taper, and Joseph LoDuca. Long before anyone imagined the world's cult classic, there were simply young creatives with impossible ambitions and very little money. LoDuca wasn't an outsider brought in at the end of production. He was already part of the creative family. He had known Raimi through the local Michigan filmmaking scene and understood instinctively the kind of energy his friend wanted to capture. That friendship mattered because when you're making a film on an almost non existent budget, trust becomes every bit as valuable as talent. There simply wasn't room for ego. Everyone wore multiple hats. Everyone solved problems. Everyone believed. It's one of the reasons that The Evil Dead still feels so alive. You can sense the enthusiasm behind every frame, and you can hear it in every note. The Evil Dead's production has become the stuff of legend. Cast and crew sleeping in the cabin, equipment constantly breaking down, shoots lasting for longer than expected, freezing conditions, physical exhaustion, financial uncertainty. Almost every aspect of the production demanded compromise. Music was no exception. Unlike major Hollywood productions with access to large orchestras and generous recording schedules, LoDuca had to think creatively, very creatively. The score was assembled with a relatively small group of musicians, careful orchestration, and an enormous amount of ingenuity. Every instrument had to justify its place. Every recording session counted. Rather than attempting to initiate the sweeping symphonic horror scores of the era, LoDuca embraced the film's limitations. And in doing so, created something far more unsettling. This raises an interesting question. What exactly should evil sound like? By 1981, horror audiences had already become familiar with several musical traditions. Bernard Herrmann had shown how shrieking strings could become weapons in Psycho. John Carpenter proved that minimalist synthesizers could generate unbearable tension in Halloween. Jerry Goldsmith explored religious terror through choral grandeur in The Omen. LoDuca chose another path. Instead of composing memorable themes for monsters, he composed atmosphere. His music rarely announces itself. Instead, it creeps. Strings seem to bend unnaturally. Harmony refuses to settle. Melodies appear only to dissolve moments later. The score behaves almost like the unseen force moving through the Tennessee woods, always present, rarely visible, never entirely understood. One of the most fascinating aspects of LoDuca's score is the way it mirrors the film's central idea: possession. The music itself rarely remains still. It shifts constantly, moving from quiet unease to explosive violence in a matter of seconds. Just as the Deadites corrupt ordinary people, the soundtrack corrupts ordinary musical expectations. Moments of fragile beauty are suddenly interrupted by jagged orchestral attacks. Silence becomes as frightening as sound itself. Even when nothing appears on screen, the music insists that something is terribly wrong. It creates anxiety before the audience fully understands why. This is one of horror's music's greatest strengths. It doesn't simply accompany fear, it predicts it. Listening to The Evil Dead today, one might notice certain rough edges. The recording lacks the polished sheen of a modern blockbuster. Some passages feel raw, others feel almost experimental. But these qualities are precisely what makes the score so distinctive. Like Raimi's energetic camera work, like Tom Sullivan's practical effects, like Bruce Campbell's wonderfully physical performance, LoDuca's music embraces imperfection. It sounds handcrafted because it was. That roughness gives the soundtrack an intimacy almost absent from contemporary horror. It reminds us that this was never manufactured by committee. It was built by passionate artists finding solutions one note at a time. Sometimes limitations don't weaken creativity, they define it. When The Evil Dead premiered in 1981, audiences understandably focused on the film's extraordinary visuals. Few realized they were also witnessing the birth of one of horror's longest and most rewarding composer-director collaborations. Joseph LoDuca had found his voice, but so too had The Evil Dead. The music would continue to evolve alongside the franchise itself, growing larger, bolder, funnier, even unexpectedly heroic. Yet no matter how ambitious the scores became, their DNA can always be traced back to those first haunting notes recorded by a handful of friends determined to make the impossible. Next time on Sounds of Horror, we'll follow Joseph LoDuca beyond the isolated cabin. We'll explore how Evil Dead 2 transformed horror into symphonic chaos, how Army of Darkness embraced epic fantasy, and how LoDuca's remarkable career extended far beyond the world of Deadites into television, adventure, and one of the most enduring composer-director partnerships in modern genre cinema. Until then, keep listening, because sometimes the most frightening thing about horror isn't what you see, it's what you hear.